news as Hurricane Helene gets closer to making landfall. It's already an extremely dangerous Category 4 hurricane and is expected to bring catastrophic rain and winds when it touches down in Florida's
Carolina is cleaning up from the worst flooding ever on record for the state. More than 100 people are dead from Helene, a number that's still expected to rise.
Still unaccounted for following Hurricane Helene. The death toll across the southeast rising to at least 133 people.
800 miles wide and 1,000 miles long. Tropical storm force winds extend nearly 350 miles from its center.
At 130 miles per hour, the type of damage that will certainly affect roofs and structural walls of buildings and feet of water in those homes.
Hundreds more are missing and roughly 2.1 million customers are without power across the region.
We begin tonight with the spiraling emergency after Hurricane Helene, the mounting death toll, at least 182 lives lost, hundreds still unaccounted for.
We showed up just like any other event, thinking we were going to show up and do our duties like we normally do, and quickly realized that it was going to be an event like none of us have ever worked, ever. You know, from 30 foot of water from Asheville to Boone, which is an hour and a half, 2-hour drive within those mountains. It was 20 foot of water in multiple places, 30 foot of water in multiple places, multiple towns, unnamed towns, unknown towns that people have never heard of, anywhere from communities of 150 people to 80 people. Very, very small hill-type communities got impacted with torrential downpours of floodwaters and massive mudslides that your eyes can hardly even fathom, and tornadoes on top of it. And basically here to kind of shed some light on it and let people know from an on-field standpoint of what we experienced and how we experienced it and how impactful working this storm was, and the impacts it had on the people and the impacts that the people had on me in return, and many of us. As far as they knew, the whole world was ending. Massive mudslides taking out 20, 30 houses, roads, highways gone, people trapped, trees, you know, the biggest, largest trees you've ever seen thrown around like toothpicks.
That is a twisted tree.
And we've worked a lot of storms, and a lot of us adjusters have seen a lot of damage. We're pretty numb to it for the most part. The first weekend, we were down in Marion and kind of getting some, aroused people, so to speak, on our claims, and we were just not seeing the damage like everybody was kind of talking about, and kind of just thinking this was going to be a breeze. And a weekend headed up north, up the mountain, about 45 minutes. And within that 45-minute drive, you could see the geographic of damage changed, and highways and bridges washed out. And me and the boys and my brothers, we quickly realized that this one was going to be a rough one.
We are on our way up to Western North Carolina, about 100 and so days after the hurricane, to go see what's happening up there, see how the people are getting around, see how much progress or lack of progress there is, and just go touch down in a few spots that we worked, that me and my brothers worked at, and a few areas that were heavily impacted. We're about 30 minutes out, and we're starting to see some trees down, and so I'm already getting a little anxious just driving in here, just really curious to see what they've done about the infrastructure of this place and where they've even started and where they could even start. There was so much damage, it's hard to even wrap your head around where they were going to get the manpower and the funds and the resources to build this back. So I'm really curious what they've done to even try to rebuild it.
So on October 14th, I showed up, and the day started off and ended in the same way. And and heavy, a lot of damage. I was in Lake James. I started off my morning in Lake James on October 14th, and I come down into a community, and it was a mobile home community, but had like structurally built houses, you know, that people decide to retire there. And I'm coming down, and it's just dusty. And there's a couple trucks, and you go down this kind of dirt road and drop down into this flat area, and it is just mud. And the smell of that place was just I don't even know what it was. Just the smell of mud and debris, and the amount of trailers washed up in corners, and the amount of soot, you know, everywhere. There's just a dozer that was working there, obviously, in the morning, and you can just see fresh cut mud in each direction.
We're here in Lake James, 100+ days afterwards, and doesn't look any different than when I showed up. We're through all the only cut roads right here. You can see all the soot and mud. It's piled as high as possible. Still a ghost town. To give you any idea, that water line's above my hand, and that soot line's way up there. A lot of water. In this general area, I had one in here for sure that was in this little community that we're at. But I had 5 or 6 all the way stretched down on this lake right here, Lake James. So yeah, my first couple days, not my first couple days, but about a week or 2 after, this is when I realized that it was what they were talking about. I was just telling you earlier, you know, we got here and we just didn't see the damage, and it's really hit in these areas where anywhere where there's a close creek or water or anything, those are the places that got it the worst. And obviously, like this place, you come around one corner and it's just as bad as ever, and you go right up top of that hill like nothing happened.
So yeah, after about 2 weeks of just running chaotic, and you know, you're trying to find even just a place to stay is half the battle, and finding a place that even has working Wi-Fi, and which we have to just make sure people even get paid and to do our job right. And so you're searching around hours trying to find anything on Airbnb, and up there in the mountains there was no hotels or nothing. And so 2 weeks in, man, we had our butts kicked. You could see it on all of our faces and all of our emotions. We were all tired, and knew that we were barely 2 weeks in. Generally, that's like you kind of get over the hump. But I was starting to get total losses 2.5, 3 weeks in. Massive trees crushing houses. And, you know, at 3 weeks in, you just don't get that. It doesn't get worse. On October 16th, big day. One day that I'll probably never forget. I went down to Pensacola, which is south of Burnsville, in a little area that they call the CeeLo community. On the phone, it was a USAA claim, I'm a high-ranking officer, and they put some urgency on this one, and it was almost 2.5, 3 weeks out, you know, and it was the first time that anybody had been down in this area. So I had met Mrs. Bullock on top of the mountain, basically, on where we were gonna drive. And we got escorted down in there by a convoy of other vehicles. We're getting in there and the convoy is getting thinner and thinner because people are pulling off, you know, to their places, and they have this beautiful little custom red cabin built in the 40s, and it's got 2 massive oak trees on it, and it had just crushed this thing in every little which way possible. And he's just right to work. So respectfully, I try to give him that same attitude. So I get right into it, and he's drilling me the entire time. This was custom, and Jeff, man, Jeff built this house when he was 16 years old. And I started, after an hour of him talk, I could start to tell that he was almost worried, you know, in his voice. He just like kept bringing up Jeff. So I asked, I said, well, where's this Jeff you keep talking about? And he's just shakes his head. We're sitting there in this living room, and it's just like trees hanging over the top of us. The house is creaking every time someone takes a step. And he said, man, Jeff's unaccounted for, man. He'd been missing for like 3 weeks. They don't have him on the deceased list yet, but I mean, they got him on the missing list and they can't find him. So I knew my instincts were right, you know, that was his friend, and that they had done a lot of work on that house together. And so I'm like, I'm so sorry, man. And I was like, I can't get over the fact that this is what we're looking at 3 weeks later. So we're sitting there and get back to my inspection, and I hear Mrs. Bullock kind of screech, Jeff, Jeff! Me and Mr. Bullock kind of come running out. We're like, what are you talking about? And you look behind, and there's just mudslides and piles of trees, and half of this house is like tipped over on its side. And so we're sitting there in the foyer area, and Mrs. Bullock kind of screams out, like, Jeff, is that Jeff? And we come running out, and we hear the word Jeff, you know, and we come out, and this house, there's mudslides, and this house is tipped up on its side. And this little old Ford pickup, you can hear it, chink, chink, clank, clank, you know, clank, clank, clanking around. Sure enough, man, this little old pickup pulls up, and it's Jeff. And Mrs. Bullock is just like beyond herself. Oh my God, Jeff, I'm so glad you're okay. I'm so glad you're alive. Oh my gosh. And Mr. Bullock kind of looks over at him, and he pulled up. He said, Jeff says, oh, well, calm down a little bit. I'm all right. I heard all the trucks coming. I thought I'd just come see what all the ruckus is about. I look over at Mr. Bullock, man, and I can just see his only emotion he showed, you know, or has shown in a long time. And he's red in the face and watery eyed. Takes a big swallow. Jeff, we thought you were dead. I'm standing in the middle of this conversation. Jeff says, yeah, I'm doing all right. Like real modest. And Mrs. Bullock kind of just motherly starts kind of grilling him. Where have you been? And what is going, like no one knows where you're at, and you've been missing. Your kids don't know where you're at. No one knows where you're at. And he steps out of the truck and says the boldest thing you've ever heard another human being say. Mind you, his house has gotten wiped out. The community was gone, and 30 foot of water and tornadoes come ripping through this place. And Jeff steps out of the truck, and his response was, well, I knew where I was at, and so did God. And you know, I literally was like, what? I looked over at Mr. Bullock, straight face, and I said, what did he just say? I was baffled at that response. The whole world came crashing down. He'd watched his neighbor die off his front porch. He told us that he watched. He said the name, yeah, Mr. So-and-so. I was sitting there and I watched him go. All he said was, he goes, well, I walked up the ravine and I waited it out. And he had a little cabin that he'd kind of hunkered down in. And she starts, you know, motherly like again, well, what did you eat? And what was, you know, how did you survive? And he said, well, I done lived in the mountains before. I know how to get water, and the creek little spring was fine up by my house. So I drank out of that. And he said the Black Hawk helicopter was dangling this rope, swinging back and forth. So I grabbed a mirror and I flashed him. And he got over the top of me, and I picked a spot, and I cut a circle out, and I put a big X with some sticks on it, and he dropped that rope down with a bucket right on that X. I grabbed the rope, I thumbed him up, I looked in that bucket, there was about 10 ham sandwiches in that bucket. And he said, By the grace of God, I had a dozer and a traco that didn't get hit. I'd been here working for them military boys, and he'd basically been there for 3 weeks cutting roads and building bridges, and Jeff's kind of going through what he's been doing, and he'd been cutting roads with the dozer, and he said, by the grace of God, I had a diesel tank up there, and you can look through all the shrub and all the mess, and you see this little white diesel tank, and he said it didn't get hit by the slide, and it's like the only thing standing up there on this side of this mountain is that diesel tank, a little flat area, and it had 1,000 gallons of red dye diesel in it. He said, yeah, I done cut the trees off your house, and Mrs. Bullock just loses it and just starts crying. Yeah, it was you, oh my gosh, I can't believe it. And he said, yeah, I'm up at Mrs. So-and-so's house right now. Checks his watch, he goes, if I get going right now, I should be finished by sundown. And she's like, no, you need to go down, you need to go let them know you're alive. And he's caked, dirty, fingernails long, mud caked on his pants. He's tired, drained, just blood cuts, all dried blood on his arms, you know, crusted mud on his shoulders, grease and black everywhere. It literally looks like a mountain man. He looks over at us, he says, nah, you know where to find me. Hops back up in his truck and drives back off in that debris and all that nasty damage.
Well, 100 days, it looks exactly how I left it. Like I said before, man, it was 30 foot of water on this side, and then tornadoes spin off the top. And if you're wondering how I know tornadoes, it's because the tops of the trees are broken off and twisted off like toothpicks. Floodwaters don't do that, that's from wind. This whole little community right here, this was all asphalt road, mailboxes, street lights. It don't look like that now. So we were standing right here. Long story short, Jeff popped out of these back behind here. And as you can see, it's just walls of mud and nothing. And this was a tiny little road at the time, and it was cut up and pushed, and all the mud pushed up back behind that brown house. And Jeff's rolled down this way somehow, some way, rolled right up in here in his pickup truck, and that's when we saw Jeff. Holy, that might be Jeff. While we're here recording about maybe 50 days since I've been here, 100 days after the event, the main character in this, the whole reason behind all of this video and being out here is because of Jeff. And Evan and I were just sitting here in the area where Jeff had crawled out of, where I was telling the story. And we're sitting here parked in the middle of the road, and a truck pulls up behind us, and you wouldn't believe who it was. It was Jeff, the man himself. And we're here on this day randomly. We have a couple hours to be here because the snow's coming tomorrow. He's still out here working.
So the message that I basically want to spread and be clear on is that we've been put in a very unique situation as insurance adjusters, as independent insurance adjusters at that, is to speak and be freely and to serve people. And to serve people in the way that these people up in the mountain have served each other in that way. Serve people and have faith like Jeff. We need a whole lot more Jeffs in this world, and that continue to serve and love people even when your wife gets taken from you, or your house, or your personal belongings.